It was a gloomy Thursday in Houston, Texas, back in 2026. The torrential rain had been relentless for 3 straight days. I sat in the cramped kitchen of my old modest home on Oak Street, listening to the downpour beat against the tin roof like angry fists, as if it wanted to tear the place apart. At 68, I survived on an $850 monthly Social Security check and a tiny pension from my years as a social worker. I'd lived through countless Gulf Coast hurricanes, but this one felt different. On the radio, the National Weather Service kept repeating terms like unprecedented and catastrophic flooding. For once, they weren't exaggerating. I pulled my worn bathrobe tighter around myself, took a sip of my lukewarm morning coffee, and tried to ignore the brown water stain rapidly spreading across the ceiling. The leak had started yesterday, but I'd kept telling myself the old house would hold out until the storm passed. Lately, though, my judgment had been off about a lot of things. My gaze drifted to 2 framed photos on the kitchen table. One was of Marcus at his promotion ceremony last year. He looked so sharp in his Army service uniform, chest full of ribbons. Even at 42, his smile still had that sweet, boyish charm. The same smile that melted my heart 26 years ago when he was just a homeless, rebellious 16-year-old kid living on the streets. Right next to it was another frame, my biological son Ruben's wedding photo from 11 years ago. He was in a custom tuxedo, arm wrapped around his bride, Brixton. She was wearing a $15,000 Vera Wang gown, sporting a flawless, arrogant smile. The 2 boys I raised had built lives that couldn't have been more different, and the contrast was painful. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the living room. I jumped, spilling coffee all over the table. I rushed out to see what happened and found my old bookshelf completely collapsed. Where the window used to be, there was now a gaping hole, and muddy water was rushing in like a waterfall. The levee had failed. Within minutes, the murky water was past my ankles and rising fast. Shaking, I grabbed whatever I could reach, my purse, the photo of Marcus, and a small duffel bag with a few changes of clothes. Everything else, 42 years of memories gathered in this little house, was left to the mercy of the flood. With trembling hands, I dialed 911. But of course, the emergency lines in Houston were completely jammed. A recorded FEMA message kept repeating over the receiver. Please evacuate immediately and seek higher ground. Higher ground. In a flooded city, the only safe high ground haven I knew was a 40-minute drive away at Maple Ridge Estates. It was an upscale, gated community with 24-hour security on the outskirts of Houston. Ruben and Brixton lived there in a $1.2 million mansion, built on a hill that was entirely safe from flooding. I hadn't been invited to their home in over 2 years. Not since Thanksgiving, when Brixton made it cold and clear that my presence made her wealthy friends highly uncomfortable. She claimed my working-class ways just didn't fit in with their elite lifestyle. But this was a life-or-death emergency. I naively assumed that in a crisis like this, family and blood relations would matter more than her white rugs and Swarovski crystal chandeliers. The drive to Maple Ridge Estates was a nightmare. My 15-year-old Honda Civic struggled through the flooded streets, the wipers slapping wildly against the windshield, but barely clearing the wall of water. By the time I showed my ID to the security guard at the gate and finally pulled up to their house, I was drenched. Running from the car to their porch took only seconds, but it was enough to soak me to the bone, leaving my shoes caked in thick black mud. 127 Maple Road always made me feel small. The house was a massive monument to material success. Modern architecture, huge glass windows, a manicured lawn that cost more to maintain each month than I spent on groceries in half a year, and a 3-car garage housing Ruben's BMW, Brixton's Mercedes G-Wagon, and her weekend Porsche. I stood on their grand, sheltered porch, water dripping from my graying hair. I clutched my small duffel bag to my chest like a shield and rang the doorbell. It played a complex classical melody, a smart system that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Through the frosted glass, I saw movement in their marble foyer. The door opened, but only a crack. Brixton stood there. Even this early, her blonde waves were perfectly styled. She wore an expensive cream silk robe that likely cost more than my entire yearly wardrobe budget. When she saw me, her green eyes widened. It wasn't with worry or relief, but pure disgust. "Oh my God," she gasped, her voice dripping with the kind of distaste you'd have if you stepped on something gross. "Denise, what are you doing here in this weather?" "My house is flooded," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite how she was looking at me. "I need a place to stay until—" No. The word was sharp, flat, and left no room for discussion. Absolutely not. I blinked, wondering if I had heard her right. Brixton, I just need... Look at you! She pointed at my soaked clothes, my mud-covered shoes, and the water pooling on her pristine porch. You're a mess. You'll ruin my new white rugs. Do you know how much they cost? $15,000. I can leave my shoes outside, I offered weakly. But she was already shaking her head. It's not just the shoes, Denise. You're soaked and you smell like stagnant floodwater and mold. My cleaning service just did a deep clean yesterday. She pulled her silk robe tighter, as if I were carrying something contagious. Just then Reuben appeared behind her. My son. 42 years old, a senior partner at a major insurance firm in Houston, highly successful. Ever since his father died of a sudden heart attack when Reuben was just 3, I had raised him alone. I worked 2 jobs and gave up my own dreams for him. I served coffee by day and cleaned office buildings by night just to put him through the University of Texas at Austin. Mom? He looked confused, as if finding his mother on his doorstep during a natural disaster was the strangest thing in the world. What's going on? Your mother wants to come in, Brixton said, her voice dripping with contempt. She's covered in mud, soaking wet, and wants to track dirty water all over the house. I looked at my son, waiting for him to tell his wife that of course my mother is coming in, that family is more important than some rug, that there would always be a place for her here. I waited for him to remember the nights I stayed up with him when he was sick, or the sacrifices I made so he could have a better life. Instead, he looked at Brixton, then back at me. His expression was slightly uneasy, but his stance was firm. Mom, maybe you'd be better off at a shelter. The Red Cross set up an emergency shelter at the George R. Brown Convention Center downtown. Those words hit my chest like a sledgehammer. A shelter? He was suggesting his 68-year-old mother, the woman who raised him alone and gave him everything, go crowd into a chaotic public shelter downtown just to keep his wife's expensive floors clean? Reuben, I whispered, my voice breaking, just until the water goes down, a few days at most. Brixton stepped closer to him, wrapping her arm possessively around his. Honey, the Hendersons are coming over for dinner tomorrow night. You know how important that insurance contract is for your firm. We can't have this ruining our plans. She called me this, like I was a stray animal that wandered onto their lawn. Sorry, Mom, Reuben said, avoiding my eyes. Brixton's right. We have social obligations. Obligations. Apparently, those obligations didn't include me. They didn't include the woman who wore her joints out with arthritis working long hours just to pay for his college, help him marry a woman like Brixton, and live in a house like this. Please, I pleaded, hating how desperate I sounded. I really have nowhere else to go. The roads are blocked. There's the Red Cross shelter, Brixton repeated, her hand already closing the door. They'll take care of you. That's what the government is for. Or you could call that kid you used to help out. Reuben chimed in, as if he'd just had a brilliant idea. What was his name? Marcus. Isn't he stationed at some military base in Texas? That kid you used to help out. He said it so casually, as if Marcus were just some charity case I had briefly assisted, rather than a real son to me, as if he forgot that Marcus called me every single week, sent flowers on Mother's Day, and never forgot a single thing I did for him. You can't just leave me out here, I said, my voice cracking. But the door was already swinging shut. Good luck, Denise. Brixton's voice drifted through the narrowing gap. I hope you find somewhere suitable. The door clicked shut. The soft sound of the brass lock engaging felt like a thunderclap in my ears. I stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the custom brass plaque that read, The Holbrooks. Rain dripped from my hair onto the expensive stone tiles. Finally, I turned around and dragged my heavy legs back to my old Honda. As if things couldn't get worse, the rain poured down even harder. By the time I got back into the driver's seat, I was shivering uncontrollably. I started the engine, turned on the heater, and stared at the mansion through the wet window. I could see them moving around inside. Reuben was back to his routine, holding a cup of coffee, while Brixton was probably checking her precious rugs to see if I had left any trace of contamination. Neither of them looked out the window to see if I made it out safely. They didn't care. With freezing, trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone. There was only one number left to call. Only one person who had never let me down, never locked me out, and never made me feel like a burden. The man who shared no blood with me, but was my true son in every way that mattered. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Marcus's warm, deep voice came through. Mom, are you okay? I've been watching the news in Houston and the flooding in your area looks terrible. Mom. He called me Mom, a word my biological son rarely used anymore. Marcus. I choked out his name, unable to say another word. It felt like dry glass was caught in my throat. Where are you? His voice instantly sharpened with military alertness. Are you safe? Is the house okay? No, I sobbed quietly. Nothing is okay. I didn't tell him what Reuben and Brixton did. I couldn't bring myself to say their cruelty out loud. It made the heartbreak too real. I just gave him the address where I was parked and asked if he could help me find a motel or a shelter. Stay right there, he commanded. I could hear rapid movement and static from a tactical radio in the background. Don't move. I'm coming to get you. So I sat in my old Honda on that street lined with luxury SUVs waiting for Marcus. 24 years of sacrifice, 24 years of loving a biological son who had just shut me out. The memories rushed over me, hit harder than the floodwaters outside. I was 30 when David died. A sudden heart attack took him at 35, leaving me with a 3-year-old son and medical bills that would take a decade to pay off. I remember looking in the bathroom mirror of our tiny apartment, listening to baby Reuben breathe in his crib, wondering how we were going to survive. David's life insurance barely covered the funeral. He had always meant to get a larger policy, but we never had the extra money. I only had a high school education and no real job experience. But I was determined that my son would never feel poor or less than other kids. So I did what I had to do. I worked as a low-level clerk at the county social services office by day and cleaned office buildings by night. While other mothers were tucking their kids in, I was scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans to keep us afloat. A neighbor watched Reuben for $20 a week, money I squeezed out of our tight budget. Reuben grew up thinking this was normal. He didn't know other mothers didn't fall asleep at the kitchen table over cold coffee at 2 a.m. He didn't know other families didn't eat cereal for dinner 3 nights a week because their moms were too exhausted to cook. He only knew there was food on the table, clean clothes in his drawers, and new school supplies every fall. As he got older, I did everything to help him fit in. When he wanted to play Little League, I took on extra cleaning shifts to buy the expensive gear. When he needed a suit for his 8th grade dance, I worked through a high fever. When he wanted an electric guitar in high school, I pawned my wedding ring, the only valuable thing David had left me. I told myself it would all be worth it, that when he grew up he would understand. He would see what I did for him, and he would appreciate the future I built. But that understanding never came. Instead, Reuben seemed to resent the sacrifices. When I missed his football games because of work, he accused me of not caring. When I fell asleep at his school play after working a double shift, he said I embarrassed him. When I couldn't afford family vacations to Florida or Cancun like his friends' parents did, he acted ashamed of our lifestyle. Why can't you be like Jimmy's mom? He demanded at 14. She's at every event. She volunteers at school. She actually cares. I wanted to tell him that Jimmy's mom didn't have to work 2 jobs to keep the lights on. I wanted to explain that my absence was because I was pushing myself to the limit just to give him the same opportunities as Jimmy. But a 14-year-old boy doesn't understand sacrifice. He only understands who is there and who isn't. The real turning point came the year Marcus entered our lives. It was 2004, and Reuben was 21 and away at college. Part of his tuition was paid for by the countless hours I worked to afford SAT prep classes. By then, I had become a licensed social worker after 8 years of night school. The pay was better, but the job was emotionally exhausting. Marcus was 16 when he was assigned to my caseload. A ward of the state, he had been bounced around foster homes since he was 8, with every placement ending in disappointment. His file was thick with runaway reports, truancy, minor theft charges, and behavioral issues. When I first met him in my office, he slouched in the chair opposite me, looking like a trapped animal looking for an exit. His dark hair fell over his eyes, and his clothes, though clean, were a size too small, the typical wardrobe of a growing foster kid with no one to look after him. But it was his eyes that got to me. They held a deep, exhausted sadness that I recognized from my own reflection years ago. It was the look of someone who had long since stopped expecting anything good from the world. "So?" he said before I could even introduce myself, his voice dripping with defensive sarcasm. "Which juvenile hall are you sending me to this time?" "Actually," I said, closing his file and leaning back, "I was wondering if you'd like to join me for dinner." He stared at me as if I were speaking another language. "What? Dinner?" "At my place tonight. My meatloaf is pretty good and I have a spare bedroom that's just collecting dust." "Lady, you don't even know me," he sneered. "I know enough," I replied, and somehow I did. I knew the weight of loneliness and fear. I knew what it felt like when the world turned its back on you, and I knew what even a small amount of kindness could mean to someone who had given up hope. That night, Marcus sat at my kitchen table, ate 3 helpings of meatloaf, and listened as I laid down the house rules. Home by 10 p.m. on school nights, homework before TV, no drugs or alcohol, and above all, mutual respect. He nodded along, clearly expecting this arrangement to last a week before he got into trouble and was kicked back into the system. But 3 weeks turned into 3 months. 3 months turned into a year. Slowly, Marcus started to trust that this was real. His grades went from failing to the honor roll. He started talking about the future, maybe college, maybe the military. He washed dishes without being asked and learned to do his own laundry. Most importantly, he smiled. A real smile, not the bitter, guarded smirk he used to wear. When Ruben came home from college for Christmas break and found someone else living in the house, he was furious. "Who is this kid?" he demanded, raising his voice as if Marcus couldn't hear him from the next room. "Why is he here? Where am I supposed to sleep?" "Marcus is staying in the study for now," I explained patiently. "You still have your room." "But why is he even here? This is our house." "Our house?" As if Ruben had ever contributed a dime toward the mortgage or utilities. As if he had a right to dictate how I used the space I worked so hard to keep. "He's here because he needs a safe place," I said quietly. "Just like you did when you were growing up." "How is that the same? I'm your actual son." The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. I heard a door close quietly down the hall. It was Marcus, giving us privacy, trying not to get caught in a family argument he hadn't started. "Marcus is part of this family now," I said firmly. "He's been here for almost a year and he's earned his place." "Earned it? By doing what? He's just some troubled kid you took in because you felt sorry for him." At that moment, something in me snapped. For 21 years I had held my tongue, making excuses for Ruben's selfishness, hoping he would mature into a kinder person. But all that pent-up frustration finally boiled over. "Marcus helps me with the groceries," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "He repainted the fence this summer without me even asking. Last month when I was sick he noticed and made me soup. When I talk about my day, he actually listens and asks how I am. When was the last time you did any of those things?" Ruben's face turned red. "I don't have time for that stuff. I'm in college. I'm working on my future." "A future I am paying for," I reminded him. "A future I work 60 hours a week to secure." "Nobody asked you to," he yelled. The room went dead silent. "You're right," I said quietly, feeling an overwhelming exhaustion. "Nobody asked me to. I did it because I love you, just like I helped Marcus because I care about him." Ruben stormed out that night and didn't speak to me for 3 months. When he finally called, it was to announce he had met a girl named Brixton and was planning to propose. He wasn't asking for my blessing, he was just informing me, the same way you'd let someone know you changed your phone number. Meanwhile, Marcus thrived. He graduated high school with honors and enlisted in the army. The day he left for basic training, he hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for saving my life, Mom. I promise I'll make you proud." "Mom?" He called me Mom, and it sounded so natural coming from him. Over the years, Marcus rose through the ranks, joining the Rangers and then Special Forces, earning commendation after commendation. Ruben, meanwhile, climbed the corporate ladder. The contrast between them only grew sharper. Marcus called every week, sent flowers on Mother's Day, and visited whenever he had leave. He proudly introduced me to his fellow soldiers as his mother, never feeling the need to explain the details of how we became family. To him, I was his mother, and he was my son. Ruben, on the other hand, grew more distant with every promotion and raise. His visits became infrequent, driven more by obligation than genuine affection. When he married Brixton, I could see the calculation in her eyes, assessing my value to their social climbing. Clearly, I didn't measure up. Their wedding was incredibly lavish. $50,000 floral arrangements, endless champagne, and designer everything. I wore my best dress, an $89 sale item from Macy's, trying my best to fit in with Brixton's wealthy family and friends, but feeling completely out of place. It was Marcus, looking striking in his dress uniform, who stood by me as my escort. He made sure I wasn't left sitting alone. He held my arm, proudly introducing me to guests, making me feel respected and valued. At one point, Brixton's mother approached me near the dessert table. "Oh, so you're the one who raised that handsome young soldier," she said in a patronizing tone. "How wonderful of you to give him a chance." She spoke as if Marcus was lucky to have met me rather than the other way around. "Actually," I replied with a polite smile, "I'm the lucky one. He is the best son a mother could ever ask for." She arched an eyebrow. "But Reuben is your actual son, isn't he?" "Biology doesn't make a family," I said quietly. "Love does." Now, sitting in my freezing car during a relentless storm, I realized how true those words really were. Reuben had my blood, but Marcus had my heart. One took everything I had to give and still wanted more. The other took a little warmth and returned it with his entire life, asking for nothing but love in return. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I watched Reuben and Brixton move about their warm, dry home. They had probably already forgotten about their wet, inconvenient mother. They had their perfect white rugs, their social circles, and their carefully curated lives. But I had something far better. I had a son who was currently driving through a dangerous storm to rescue me. Not because of any legal obligation, but because he wanted to. A son who, no matter how high he rose, would never forget where he came from or turn his back on the person who raised him. The distant rumble of heavy engines cut through my thoughts. In my rearview mirror, I saw bright lights piercing through the rain. It wasn't just one vehicle, but a convoy. They navigated the flooded streets in a synchronized, precise line. Marcus hadn't come alone. He had brought his team. As the headlights drew closer, a feeling washed over me that I hadn't felt in a long time. Absolute certainty. I knew someone was willing to brave the storm just to keep me safe. I knew I was worth saving, worth protecting, and worth loving. Tonight, blood had failed me, but family had arrived. The convoy that turned onto Maple Road looked like a jagged scar against the manicured perfection of that millionaire's row. 3 all-black government-plated Tahoes pushed through the deluge in a tight diamond formation, their high beams cutting through the rain like searchlights. Trailing them was an Oshkosh tactical transport, a behemoth of steel that belonged in a desert war zone, not a suburban street lined with palm trees. They came to a hard, thunderous halt in front of Reuben's house. The low, guttural growl of their engines didn't fade. It pulsed, a warning that drowned out the storm. The lead SUV stopped inches from my old Honda. Even through the rain, I could see the passenger leaning into a tactical radio. This wasn't just a parking job. It was a defensive tactical deployment. The door opened. Marcus stepped out into the ankle-deep mud. At 42, he still carried the same resilient posture I remembered from his youth. But now it was overlaid with something terrifying. In the military, they call it command presence. Ignoring the monsoon, he was in his full Army service uniform, clearly rushed here from a high-level function. The silver star on his shoulder flashed in the lightning, and the rows of ribbons on his chest whispered of things he'd done for this country. He stood with a rigid authority that made the very air seem to snap to attention. Before I could even process the sight, he was at my door. "Mom." I rolled down the window, and wind and rain flooded the car, but he stepped in to block the gale with his own body. His voice held a cold, controlled fury I had only heard once before, the day he graduated high school and realized Reuben had blown off the ceremony to go golfing. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied, though we both knew it was a stretch. "Marcus, what is all this? Why the military vehicles?" He didn't answer right away. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping the convoy before locking onto the mansion like a laser. The house was blazing with light now. Through the massive picture window, I could see Reuben and Brixton standing there, frozen in shock, staring out at the display of force in their driveway. "When someone threatens my mother's well-being," Marcus said, his voice as sharp as glass, "I provide a tactical response." He produced a massive black umbrella from nowhere, popped it open and hauled my door wide. "Let's go, Mom. I'm taking you out of this storm." "Marcus, I don't want to cause trouble." I hesitated. "The trouble is already here," he said, his voice possessing a steel will I'd never heard. "The ones who caused it are the idiots who didn't know who they were dealing with." As I stepped out, I noticed the other soldiers had exited their vehicles. 6 fully equipped men were standing in the rain like statues, straight as ramrods, treating this like a military operation. It was jarring, but for the first time in years, I felt safe. It was as if I'd been granted my own private army. "General Donovan," one of the officers reported, his salute crisp. "Perimeter is secure. Shall we initiate extraction?" Extraction. They spoke as if I were a diplomat trapped behind enemy lines, not an old woman turned out because of a little rain. "Thank you, Colonel Martinez," Marcus replied, his tone formal. "Please escort Mrs. Harrison to the command vehicle. Highest priority." Highest priority. The tears mixed with the rain on my face. Colonel Martinez extended his arm with the same reverence usually reserved for foreign dignitaries, steering me toward the lead SUV with extreme care. As we walked, Ruben's front door flew open. My son stood on the porch, his expression shifting from confusion to raw terror as he realized the reality of the scene on his driveway. Brixton was right behind him, having swapped her silk robe for a sweater and jeans. Even from here I could see her jaw drop as she stared at the uniforms, the government plates, and the undeniable weight of federal authority descending on her perfect life. "Marcus," I whispered as Martinez helped me into the heated SUV. "They're watching." "Good," Marcus replied, his voice projecting across the rain-swept yard to the porch. "Let them watch." The SUV was warm, hummed with sophisticated comms equipment, and smelled of leather and professionalism. As I sank into the seat, Marcus turned and began that slow, predatory walk back toward Ruben's front door. The other soldiers formed a loose tactical fan behind him. No weapons were drawn, but the discipline alone was enough to make anyone's knees buckle. Through the tinted, bulletproof glass, I watched my biological son and the boy I'd pulled off the streets. After 3 years of silence, they were finally face to face. The contrast was brutal. Ruben looked soft, his designer loungewear highlighting the weight he'd put on from years of easy living. Marcus looked like a force of nature. "Ruben," Marcus said. His voice was as clear as a command on a parade deck. "We need to talk." Ruben looked past Marcus, past the soldiers, at the display of absolute power on his property. What is this?" Ruben stammered. "Why are there military vehicles in my neighborhood?" "Because your mother needed help," Marcus said with devastating calm. "And when family needs help, you step up. That's the baseline of being a human being." Brixton rushed forward, trying to claw back some scrap of control. "Listen, I don't care who you think you are. You can't just march onto our property with these people. I am Brigadier General Marcus Donovan." Marcus cut her off, his voice slicing through her shrill tone like a blade. "And the woman you turned away in the middle of a storm is my mother." The word mother hit the air like a bomb. I watched Ruben's face pale, shock, confusion, and then the dawning horror of realizing the lethal mistake he'd just made. "Your mother?" Brixton shrieked. "She's not your mother. You have no blood connection. You're just some charity case she picked up off the street. You're bringing out an army for an old woman who can't even afford her own life?" She didn't get to finish. Marcus stepped forward, his boot heavy in the mud. The command authority in his voice chilled the air. "Ma'am, I am going to give you one chance to walk that back." "It's the truth!" Brixton yelled, her arrogance blinding her to the threat. "She's not your mom, you're nobody, you're gutter trash, The air went dead silent. Marcus's jaw tightened. The soldiers behind him didn't move, but their posture shifted into something lethal. "That woman," Marcus said, his voice low and vibrating with power, "worked 3 jobs to put me through high school. When the world turned its back on me, she gave me a home. She taught me honor. She taught me integrity. She taught me what it means to be a man." His eyes cut to Ruben, who instinctively took a step back. "To people who don't deserve her, her love is garbage. But listen to me clearly, she is under my direct protection now. Do we understand each other?" "Well, wait," Ruben finally found his voice, though it shook with fear and shame. "You can't just threaten us. I'm her biological son. I have rights." "Rights?" Marcus let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "What rights? The right to abandon your aging mother during a natural disaster? The right to throw your family into the street for the sake of your precious carpet?" Each question landed like a punch to Ruben's gut. I watched my son crumble, his cruelty and selfishness stripped bare and laid out for everyone to see. We didn't mean it like that," Ruben stammered. "We had obligations and social commitments. The house was just cleaned and she was covered in mud." "Shut up," Marcus snapped. "Every word you say makes it worse." Colonel Martinez stepped in, his voice booming for the benefit of the neighbors. "General, we have secured appropriate temporary housing for Mrs. Harrison. The VIP quarters on base are prepared for immediate occupancy." "Good," Marcus said, eyes never leaving Ruben. "Ensure Mrs. Harrison has everything she needs. Her comfort is the priority." "Sir, shall we contact the base public affairs office?" Martinez asked with military precision. "I'm sure the local news would be very interested in a community rescue operation of this magnitude." It was a perfectly delivered threat. If the media got wind of this, a high-powered insurance exec in Houston turning his mother out into a hurricane, only for the military to roll in and rescue her, it would be a national scandal. Brixton's face turned white. Media? You can't! This is a private matter. The moment you threw a mother into a storm like a dog, it ceased to be private, Marcus said coldly. You don't get to dictate how this story is told. Please! Ruben's voice finally broke. It was the first time I heard real terror in it. Please, Marcus, don't bring the press into this. We can fix this. Mom can stay here. We were just confused. No, Marcus said, finality in his tone. You were heartless. I'm the one who's clear-headed. He turned and pointed to the SUV. Mrs. Harrison will be staying where she is needed and where she is respected. Somewhere that understands what the word family actually means. As he walked toward the convoy, Ruben called out, Wait, Marcus, please, she's my mom. I made a mistake. I apologize. Marcus stopped. He looked back over his shoulder. Some mistakes don't go away with an apology, he said softly. Some lines, once crossed, change everything. He climbed back into the SUV. He looked at me, his eyes softening into a gentleness that broke my heart, a complete contrast to the steel he'd just shown Ruben. Ready to go home, Mom? Home? I asked, confused. The base quarters? Yes, he said, starting the engine. There are no designer marble floors, but it's warm, dry, and safe. And most importantly, nobody there will ever make you feel like a burden. As the convoy rolled out of Maple Ridge Estates, I took one last look. Ruben stood on his porch like a lost child, watching us go. Brixton was already gone, likely inside, desperately trying to calculate the damage to their social standing. The convoy moved with military efficiency through the rain. My mind drifted back to the two boys I raised. One had all the wealth and status in the world, yet failed the only test that mattered. The other, who gave his life to honor and country, had moved mountains just to keep me warm. Marcus, I whispered as we headed toward Fort Harrison, you didn't have to do all this, the convoy, the soldiers, the threats. I would have been happy if you'd just shown up in your old truck. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. For a second I didn't see the general. I saw the boy I'd brought home 20 years ago. Mom, when someone disrespects you, they insult me. When someone abandons you, they trample on everything I believe in, he said firmly. This wasn't just to get you out of the rain. This was to make sure everyone knew exactly who you are and what you mean to me. And who am I asked, genuinely curious. You're the woman who saved my life, he said without hesitation. You're the mother who taught me that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by choice, by commitment, and by love. You are the most protected, respected person on this planet, and you will never, ever be abandoned again. As the gates of Fort Harrison came into view, the warm, bright lights piercing the darkness, I realized Marcus hadn't just saved me from the storm. He'd saved me from a lie I'd told myself for years. The lie that biology always trumps choice. Tonight proved the opposite. Real family is who runs toward you when you call for help. Real family is who moves mountains to keep you safe. Real family is the one who thinks you are worth bringing an entire military convoy into a hurricane just to bring you home. The night at Fort Harrison was another world. Everything was orderly, quiet, and deliberate. Even in the storm, the sense of order, the idea that everyone had a duty they performed with excellence, was profoundly comforting. Marcus parked in front of a neat two-story building marked Building 17, Guest Quarters. The rain had started to taper off, but he still insisted on opening the umbrella and escorting me inside, just as he had since he was 16, with unwavering chivalry. Mrs. Harrison. The sergeant on duty greeted me with genuine warmth. Welcome to Fort Harrison. General Donovan ensured everything was ready. Anything you need, anything at all, just say the word. The apartment was simple but spotless. The kitchen was stocked, the living room was cozy, and the window looked out over the parade field. But more than that, it was filled with people who respected me. This is too much, I protested as he showed me around. I didn't need this. A motel room would have been fine. You aren't staying in a motel, he said firmly. You are staying somewhere where I can ensure your safety and comfort. Somewhere where you are treated like the person of importance that you are. Person of importance? When was the last time anyone called me that? Never. As we sat in the living room with coffee someone had thoughtfully prepared, Marcus's phone started vibrating. Messages, missed calls, voicemails, he ignored them all, his entire focus on making sure I was settled. You should answer that, I said after it buzzed for the 10th time. It might be military business. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. It's Ruben. He's been blowing up my phone for an hour. What does he want? Marcus swiped the screen, his face darkening. He wants to explain. He wants me to understand his perspective. He wants to know if we can settle this like adults. He tossed the phone on the sofa in disgust. He wants everything, except to take a single ounce of responsibility for what he did. Maybe I should speak to him, I sighed, even though the thought felt like lead in my chest. He is still my son. Families have disagreements. No, the word was final. Mom, you have to understand something. What happened tonight wasn't a disagreement. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a lapse in judgment. It was a choice. A cold, calculated decision where he prioritized material things over human dignity. He leaned forward, his voice intense but gentle. Do you know what I was doing when I got your call? I was in a meeting with my command staff, discussing overseas deployment, major military secrets. But when I heard the desperation in your voice, none of it mattered. I aborted the meeting and deployed my men, because that is what family does. But you have duties. My greatest duty is protecting the people who matter most, he said firmly. You taught me that. You sacrificed so many years of comfort for me, showing me what real love looked like. Tonight, I finally had the chance to pay you back. The phone buzzed again. This time he answered it with visible irritation. Speak. Even from across the room I could hear Ruben's voice sharp with panic. Marcus listened for 30 seconds, then cut him off. No, Ruben, it's not up for discussion. You made your choice when you left your mother in a flooded car in the middle of a storm, Marcus said, his tone that of a commander used to dealing with lethal threats. You chose your wife's carpet over your mother's safety. You chose vanity over decency. Every choice has a cost. There was frantic pleading on the other end. Marcus remained unmoved. I don't care about your explanations, he continued. I don't care about your excuses. I care about results. And the result is that when your mother was in a life-or-death situation, you failed her completely. Marcus, please, Ruben was sobbing now. Let me be clear, Marcus said, his voice dropping into that quiet, terrifying register that could make a militant surrender on the spot. As of now, Mrs. Harrison is under my lifelong protection. Any attempt to cause her mental or physical distress will be viewed as a personal provocation against me, and I handle provocations in a way you wouldn't like. What does that mean? Ruben's voice was trembling. It means you had a chance to be her son, and you threw it in the trash. It means she deserves better than a person who views her as a burden. It means that, as far as I am concerned, she has one son, and it's not you. Dead silence on the other end. Marcus, Ruben finally whispered, you can't just take my mother away. I didn't take anyone, Marcus replied with devastating calm. You threw her away like trash. I just happened to be there to catch her because I knew what she was actually worth. He hung up and blocked the number, clean, swift. Was I too cruel? He asked me, though his eyes showed no regret. I thought about it. I placed the 2 decades of disappointment on one side of the scale, and the absolute unwavering protection I felt tonight on the other. No, I finally said. I don't think you were cruel enough. Over the next few days, as I settled into life on base, the depth of Marcus's planning became clear. He hadn't just given me a shelter, he had pulled me into a community that valued respect, honor, and loyalty. Colonel Martinez's wife, Elena, brought over homemade chicken soup and invited me to the officers' wives' book club. Master Sergeant Johnson introduced me to his mother, and within an hour we were trading stories like old friends. The chaplain checked in to ensure I was supported in every way. For the first time in decades, I felt like I belonged. People wanted to know my opinion, my experiences, my thoughts. It was intoxicating, and it was heartbreaking. Intoxicating because it felt so good. Heartbreaking because it showed me how utterly alone I had been for the last 30 years. Marcus stopped by every morning and every evening. We ate dinner whenever his schedule allowed, and I finally got to know the man he'd become. It wasn't just his military brilliance, it was his character. The way he remembered the names of his soldiers' spouses, the way he led by example rather than by ego. I learned it from you, he said one night when I praised his leadership style. You never had to yell at me to get me to listen. You just lived your values, and it made me want to follow in your footsteps. I was just trying to survive, I said with a wry smile. Trying to make sure you made it through school so you could have a decent life. That's called leading by example? he corrected me. Every choice you made taught me who to be. Every sacrifice showed me what real love was. Every time you chose the right path over the easy one, you were raising a son, just not the one you expected. On the fourth day, Brixton showed up at the main gate. I was at the commissary with Elena, shopping and enjoying the simple pleasure of friendship, when my phone rang. It was the gate officer. "Mrs. Harrison, there is a civilian here claiming to know you. She says her name is Brixton Holbrook. She is very persistent." Elena and I exchanged a look. The whole base knew my story by now, and the military family instinct for protecting their own was fully activated. "Tell her I'm not available," I said coldly. "Ma'am, she says she isn't leaving until she speaks to you. She's been here for 2 hours. I sighed. Brixton's persistence was legendary in Maple Ridge. It was how she'd trapped Reuben. "Put her on." A few seconds later, my ex-daughter-in-law's voice blared through the speaker. She tried to sound sweet, but the frantic, spoiled edge was impossible to hide. "Denise, thank God! I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk." "I don't think we have anything to talk about," I said quietly. "This whole thing has gotten out of control," she pushed, ignoring me entirely. "We're family. It was a little misunderstanding, and we can totally resolve this if we just sit down." A little misunderstanding. I felt the anger flare. "You called me dirty and smelly. You said I'd ruin your carpet. You suggested I go to a public shelter with the homeless rather than stay at your home during a natural disaster. You call that a misunderstanding?" "I was under so much stress," she bargained, her tone shifting. "The storm, the chaos, everything was a mess. I wasn't thinking clearly. Surely you can understand that." Elena was watching me, an amused look on her face. She gestured for me to put it on speaker. I did. "I do understand," I said into the mic. "I understand that stress reveals a person's true character. When things got hard, you showed me exactly who you are." "It's not fair." Brixton's voice immediately hit that familiar ear-piercing shriek. "You have absolutely no idea how much pressure I was under. I spent weeks getting the house perfect for that dinner, and then you just show up out of nowhere, looking like a street beggar covered in mud and needing help," I finished for her. "Your husband's mother, stranded in a historic storm, needing help, and your immediate reaction was to protect your expensive floors." "That carpet cost $12,000, she screamed, completely abandoning any pretense of trying to smooth things over. Elena's eyebrows shot up in disbelief and she silently mouthed, $12,000, with a look that said she was dealing with a certified lunatic. "Brixton," I said, my voice incredibly cold, "let me make this very clear to you. You had one chance to prove you understood what family actually means. One chance to show a shred of humanity and decency, and you failed miserably. But we can make it up to you," she insisted, completely shameless. "Reuben feels terrible. He wants to fix this. We both do." "How?" I asked. "How do you propose to erase the fact that you locked an elderly woman out in a storm? How do you take back the moment you decided things were worth more than a person's life? We can have you over for a high-end dinner. We'll use the best china, fill the place with flowers, and make it incredibly special." I almost laughed. It was pathetic. She actually thought this was a minor social slip-up that could be smoothed over with a fancy dinner and a bit of crisis management. "I don't want your dinner, Brixton. I don't need your apologies, your excuses, or your public relations stunts. I want you to completely stay out of my life from now on." "You can't just cut us off," she yelled, her panic finally breaking through her anger. "We're family. You're Reuben's mother." "Yes," I said quietly. "I am Reuben's mother. For 42 years I loved him, supported him, and sacrificed everything in the hope that he would grow into a decent, grateful man who would treat me with the same care. But he didn't. This is who he chose to be." "But he has your blood. Blood doesn't equal commitment," I replied, hearing the strength of Marcus's influence in my own words. "Love does, respect does, decency does, and he showed none of those things." The line went silent for a long moment. When Brixton spoke again, her voice was cold and venomous. "Fine," she spat. "If you want to play it this way, go ahead. But don't expect us to keep begging. If you're going to be this stubborn and unreasonable, don't expect us to help you ever again, even if you end up with nothing." "I don't expect a single thing from you," I said honestly. "The moment you slammed that door on me, my expectations of you became zero." I hung up. Elena shook her head in disbelief. "Denise, I've been married to an officer for 23 years. And I've seen my share of messy family drama. But that woman, she has absolutely no concept of what actually matters in life. No, I agreed. She really doesn't. But I did now, more than ever. Family wasn't about blood, legal ties, or societal expectations. Family was the people who stood by you when you needed them most. The ones who protected you, respected you, and cherished you, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted to. And now, I had that. I had Marcus, Elena, and a whole community that embraced me simply for who I was. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. 3 months passed after that storm, and Fort Harrison had become far more than a temporary sanctuary. Waking up here every morning brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in decades. My quarters had become a true home, filled with personal touches, photos on the mantle, books on the shelves, and plants Elena helped me pick out. My days had a wonderful new rhythm. In the mornings, I'd have coffee with Elena and Colonel Martinez, talking about everything from the news to Texas barbecue recipes. In the afternoons, I volunteered at the base library, helping military kids with reading or working in the community garden that Sergeant Major Johnson had encouraged me to join. In the evenings, if Marcus didn't have duty, we'd share a meal. Other nights, I'd gather with the other wives who had fully embraced me as one of their own. For the first time, I felt useful, valued, and wanted. Mrs. Harrison, a young private named Rodriguez said one afternoon while I was helping him proofread a letter to his girlfriend back home. My mom would love you. She always says good people recognize each other. Everyone on base says the general is incredibly lucky to have a mother like you. I'm the lucky one, I replied, meaning every word. Marcus had given me so much more than a roof over my head. He had given me my dignity back. Here I was contributing, not acting as an embarrassing burden. I no longer had to walk on eggshells around Brixton or feel like an unwanted guest to my own son. I was done pretending that shared biology was enough to sustain a toxic relationship. My phone rarely rang with unwanted calls now. When it did, it was Elena asking to go outlet shopping, Chaplain Williams asking for help with a youth event, or Marcus asking what I wanted for dinner. After his initial desperate calls during the first week, Ruben had gone completely silent. That silence told me everything about his priorities. But in the high-stakes social circles of Houston, bad news travels fast. You need to see this, Elena said one afternoon, walking into my kitchen and sliding her iPad onto the table. Her face was a mix of concern and vindication. It was the social section of the Houston Chronicle, featuring a photo from a high-profile charity gala. The headline read, "Local Insurance Executive Faces Business Crisis Amid Family Scandal." The article was carefully worded, using the polite phrasing local papers use when writing about wealthy families. But the message was devastating. Ruben's firm was hemorrhaging business. Several of their largest corporate clients, many with strong military ties, had quietly moved their policies to his competitors. The article cited sources pointing to deep disappointment in the moral character shown by leadership recently, stating they preferred partners who aligned with community values. Marcus didn't do this, did he? I asked. Marcus didn't have to raise a finger, Elena said, leaning back. The military community talks, and many of those wealthy folks in Maple Ridge do business with defense contractors, supply chains, or veteran groups. When word got out that a wealthy executive locked a mother out in a hurricane, the community took care of the rest. I sat in silence, processing the news. To my surprise, I didn't feel any spiteful joy. Just a deep, quiet realization that people eventually have to pay for their choices. What about Ruben? I asked. Marcus's jaw tightened when I asked him about it over dinner a few days later. He's been trying to contact my office, emailing my aides, even trying to get an appointment through military protocol. What does he want? To apologize, to explain, to ask me to help save his business and reputation, Marcus said, his eyes cold. He seems to think if I just stand next to him for a photo in the paper and show forgiveness, he can get his clients back. The sheer nerve of it was stunning. Even now, facing ruin, Ruben was only focused on public relations, not genuine remorse. What did you tell him? Nothing. I ignored every single request, Marcus said. He had 42 years to learn how to treat you. He had countless opportunities to show gratitude, respect, and love. He chose not to. He is still my biological son, I murmured, though the words felt hollow. And you raised him, Marcus countered gently, which makes his betrayal even worse. Biology isn't a pass for cruelty, Mom. It just makes it more painful. 2 weeks later, Elena came over with a box of homemade cookies and some fresh news. The Hullbrook mansion is officially on the market, she announced. Really? Listed for 1.2 million, looking for a quick sale, Elena said, taking a seat. The financial strain finally broke them. Ruben lost too many key clients, and with Brixton blacklisted from her social committees, they couldn't sustain their lifestyle. I absorbed the news slowly. The perfect house that I was turned away from was now just another listing on a real estate site. Where are they going? Arizona, apparently, Elena said. They're moving in with Brixton's parents. Her father has some connections in Scottsdale, so they're trying to start over. To start over in a place where nobody knew what they had done. It was ironic. They were now forced to rebuild from nothing, much like I had to so many years ago. That evening, I sat on the small porch of my quarters, watching the sunset paint the sky gold over the parade ground. Marcus walked up with 2 cups of coffee, and we sat together in our usual comfortable silence. Elena told you about the house, he noted. Yes. How do you feel? I searched my mind, making sure I wasn't carrying any hidden resentment. Sad, I admitted. Not for them, but for the family we could have been, for the moments we could have shared if they had made different choices. Do you regret anything? No, I said instantly. I don't. They showed me who they were, and I finally opened my eyes. You can't regret seeing the truth, even if it hurts. I looked around the base, watching the lights turn on in the homes nearby, seeing families gathering for dinner and children playing on the grass. I finally know what a real family looks like, I said softly. It's not perfect, but it's real. It's built on mutual respect and genuine care. Marcus nodded, understanding completely. The housing office approved it, he said, turning to look at me. You can stay in these quarters permanently if you'd like. Honestly, having you here does wonders for morale. A lot of the younger soldiers and spouses appreciate having someone with your wisdom around. Are you asking me to stay? I'm asking you to make this your home, not as a guest, but as a permanent valued member of this community. I thought of my old house on Oak Street, which was more of a museum of painful memories than a home. I thought of the loneliness of the past few decades, and then I looked at the life I had here. Mornings with Elena, afternoons with the children, and the genuine respect of the people around me. Yes, I smiled, my eyes damp. I think this is exactly where I belong. In response, a burst of laughter came from the community center nearby, where some of the spouses were setting up an outdoor movie night. Someone called out my name, waving for me to join them. Marcus smiled, his face softening into the boy I'd taken in years ago. Go on, Mom, he said. Your family is waiting. My family. Not the one defined by blood, but the one defined by choice and love. A community that valued character over bank accounts. I stood up, smoothed my clothes, and walked toward the laughter. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. A year after the storm that changed everything, I woke up in my home at Fort Harrison feeling a profound sense of contentment. The morning sun filtered through the window, illuminating the photos on my dresser. They were new memories now, Marcus at his promotion, Elena and me laughing at the Harvest Festival, and the children from my reading group. These weren't photos kept out of obligation, they were proof of a full life. I was making coffee when my phone rang. It was Elena. Good morning, sunshine, her voice boomed. I have some news that you will either find hilarious or completely irrelevant, depending on how much you care about the past. What is it? The kind of news that proves karma is real. Are you sitting down? I laughed. Elena, I'm 69 and sitting in my kitchen. Where else would I be? Fair point. Well, remember Ruben and Brixton moving to Arizona to rebuild with her father's help? Vaguely, I said. It was the truth. Their lives felt like a distant story that had nothing to do with me. Turns out, starting over with a reputation like theirs is harder than they thought, Elena said. Brixton's father is a big deal in Scottsdale, very involved in the old money circles, but he overlooked one thing. I took a sip of coffee, sensing a turn in the story. The Phoenix area has a massive military and veteran population, Elena explained. Somehow, word of what they did in Houston reached Arizona before their moving truck did. When the local business community found out they threw a general's mother out into a hurricane, well, you can imagine. Elena, several of her father's key business partners, who happened to be retired military, pulled out of their deals. They made it clear they wouldn't do business with anyone associated with that kind of behavior. Contracts were canceled, and they were quietly blacklisted from the local clubs. I pictured Brixton's reaction to losing the social status she prized above all else. I didn't feel joy, just a quiet sense of inevitability. And it gets worse, Elena continued. The financial and social ruin took a toll on their marriage. Brixton filed for divorce last month. My sources say she was screaming at Reuben in the courthouse, blaming him for letting his poor mother ruin their lives. It was classic Brixton, blaming everyone else for the consequences of her own actions. She took whatever assets were left through her father's lawyers, Elena said. Reuben is currently working as an entry-level claims adjuster at a small firm in Phoenix. He's living in a one-bedroom apartment and driving a beat-up car. That's his life now. I waited for some reaction in myself. Satisfaction, vindication. But there was nothing, just a vast, peaceful, empty space. How do you feel? Elena asked gently. Honestly? I don't feel anything, I replied. I'm not happy about their misfortune, and I'm not sad. They just aren't a part of my life anymore. That is the healthiest place to be, Elena approved. You've moved on to better things. After we hung up, I sat at the table thinking about the concept of letting go. A year ago, if I had heard my son was struggling, I would have rushed to help him, making excuses for his behavior. But that version of me had stayed behind on that porch in the rain. I now understood that relationships must be mutual. Family is a bond of choice and respect, not a lifetime sentence of enduring selfishness just because of a shared bloodline. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Marcus standing there, looking exceptionally sharp in his dress uniform, his medals catching the morning light. "Good morning, Mom," he said, a smile on his face. "Are you free? I have something to show you." "Of course, come in, I was just—" "Actually," he intervened gently, "I'd like you to come to my office. There's a document that needs your signature." Curious, I grabbed my coat and walked with him across the base. Soldiers saluted as we passed, and we walked into his office, where a large American flag hung on the wall. On his desk was a photo of the two of us at the base gala. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the chair. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick document bearing the official seal of the state of Texas. As he pushed it toward me, I noticed his hands, which had held weapons and guided men through combat, had a slight tremble. "What is this?" I asked, looking at the bold letters at the top. "Certificate of Adult Adoption." "It's to make things official," Marcus said, his voice quiet but thick with emotion. "To make legal what we've known in our hearts for 26 years. Mom, I'm applying to legally adopt you as my mother." I stared at the paper. In Texas, adult adoption is a legal way to formalize the bond between foster parents or stepfamilies. A 39-year-old brigadier general was asking the state to recognize a 69-year-old woman as his legal mother. "Marcus," I whispered, tears instantly filling my eyes. "You don't have to do this. We know who we are to each other. A piece of paper doesn't change that." "You're right," he said, coming around the desk to kneel beside my chair so we were at eye level. "It doesn't change how much I love you, but it changes how the world sees us." He took my hand, his gaze steady. "It ensures that if anything ever happens to me, you are my legal next of kin. You inherit my pension, my estate, everything. But more than that, it tells the world that you are my chosen family, and I will never let you go." The tears spilled over, washing away the lingering traces of old hurts. "But what about your biological parents? What about them?" he asked gently. "The people who left me to the state when I was 8? The relatives who never looked for me? Mom, you are the only family I care about." I looked down at the document. Under the section for the reason for adoption, it was typed clearly, "Based on 26 years of mutual support, love, and family commitment, to legally formalize the parent-child relationship." "The background checks are done, and the hearing is next month," Marcus said. "Judge Patterson said it's the most touching petition she's seen in her career, an officer legally adopting the mother who raised him." "What does this mean for us?" I asked, my voice cracking. "It means legally, officially, and forever, you are my mother, and I am your son. It means you can legally take the name Donovan. It means no one can ever question your place in my life again." I held the document to my chest, overwhelmed by a deep, profound sense of peace. This was the ultimate proof that bonds built on choice and love are far stronger than those of simple biology. "And one more thing," Marcus said, standing up and producing a small black velvet box, placing it on top of the papers. I opened it to find a silver necklace. The pendant was engraved with the words, "My son, my choice, my pride." On the back was the date of his high school graduation. "I had this made with my first paycheck as an officer," he said, his own eyes shining. I carried it with me for years, never feeling like I had done enough to deserve giving it to you. But today, I think it's time." As he clasped the necklace around my neck, the cool silver felt warm against my chest. "Marcus," I said, looking up at him. "The night of the storm, when Reuben turned me away, I thought my life was over. I thought I had failed as a mother and a woman." He listened quietly. "But I was wrong. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my real life, my real family, and real love. Every bit of pain was worth it to be standing here with you today." "So, will you sign?" he smiled. "I'll sign," I said, taking the pen with a laugh through my tears. "Not for the legalities, but to let the universe know, you are my son, and I am your mother. Forever." 6 months later, we stood in the center of a Texas family courtroom. I wore my favorite dress, with Marcus's silver necklace resting against my collarbone. Elena, Colonel Martinez, and dozens of friends from the base crowded into the gallery, filling the room with warmth. Judge Patterson brought her gavel down with a firm, resounding crack. A warm smile broke across her face. "It is my distinct honor to grant this petition. The law now officially recognizes what has been true in your hearts for over 2 decades. Marcus Donovan and Denise Donovan are legally mother and son. May your bond continue to serve as an inspiring example of love and loyalty to us all." The gallery erupted into cheers and applause as we made our way out of the courthouse and into the brilliant Texas sunshine. "Well, Mrs. Donovan," Marcus teased, offering his arm, "how does it feel to be the official matriarch of this family?" I looked around at the crowd of people who had taken time off just to celebrate with us, at this community that had embraced me so completely, and at the beautiful, vibrant life I had built from the ashes of the past. "It feels," I smiled, "like I'm finally home." That night, during the celebration dinner Elena and Colonel Martinez hosted for us, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was short. "Mom, I saw the news about the adoption. I am so incredibly sorry for everything I did. Can we please talk?" "Reuben." I handed the phone to Marcus. He read it, his expression unreadable as he looked back at me. "How do you want to handle this?" I looked down the long dinner table. Elena was pouring wine for the sergeant major. The young officers were laughing and trading training stories, and Marcus was looking at me with the utmost respect. Every single person in this room saw me as someone of value. They were genuinely happy I was here. I took the phone back, hit delete, and cleared my trash folder. "I'm not handling it at all," I said, raising my champagne glass with a bright, easy smile. "These are the people who care about me now. My story continues here, with them." For the first time in decades, a deep, perfect, and absolute peace settled over my life.